Welcome to Rainier View Christian Church. My name is Jeff, and we are continuing our series today, multiple choice, looking at the minor prophets, and today we're going to be looking at the book of Amos. And so we're going to see that there are some pretty big needs in our world, and the question is, how do we respond to them? Now, I want you to think about for a moment, what kind of person are you? Are you the kind of person that when you see a need, you want to act immediately, right? You're a fire, ready, aim type person. You jump right in with both feet and just do something. You don't have a plan, but you're getting started. Or are you more of a person that it takes a long time for you to process needs and how to respond, or maybe to know what the right thing to do is, and you take a long time to think about it before you maybe eventually decide to act? Or, if you're being honest, are you a person that's just like, there are a lot of problems in the world that I just can't care about. I'm just looking out for myself, or maybe my immediate closest family and people near me, and that's it. I'm not really worried about the things in the world. Regardless of which person you are most like that I just described, the book of Amos speaks to how we ought to think about how to respond to the needs that we see in the world, and in terms of injustices, the things that are wrong that you wish would be made right. And the theme that we see running all throughout the book of Amos is that true faith on the inside leads to seeking justice on the outside. Our true faith that we possess on the inside is what fuels a compassionate change of justice on the outside. And so, who is Amos, and what's this book of the Bible? So again, we got to place it in its context. The prophets kind of spoke during this period of time from like 800 to 400 BC, roughly, the minor prophets. And so Amos is serving God's people in the northern kingdom of Israel at the time. They had been divided, so they're a divided kingdom, 10 tribes in the north, 2 tribes in the south, after King Solomon's reign. And both nations struggle with idolatry, which is the worship of any other god besides their covenant God, Yahweh, the one true God of the universe. And so the northern kingdom has fewer instances of getting this right, actually. They fall for idolatry again and again and again. And so their king at the time, Jeroboam, on the outside, everything looked great. Their main enemy or rival or threat, the Assyrians, were kind of at a difficult point, and so they weren't really seeking to engage, taking over more land from the Israelites at the time. And so because of this kind of ebb in geopolitical warfare for them, Jeroboam is actually able to expand the borders of Israel back to the extent that they were at the time of Solomon, the greatest extent of their kingdom boundaries. This is what's being enjoyed during his rule, during his reign, and it leads to greater wealth. But it doesn't lead to greater wealth equally distributed. See, in Jeroboam's time, the rich got richer and enjoyed more luxury and more wealth for themselves, and the poor got poorer. And yes, this wasn't an isolated moment in history. This is a theme that repeats itself again and again and again, which is why the book of Amos matters and can speak to our world and our issues today. And so Amos' strategy in his book is actually one that we are super familiar with. He starts with judging others, right? Now, don't think you're better than it. Don't think you don't do it. We all judge others, right? And Amos taps into this, right? You think about actually the way that news groups are structured to get viewership now, right? They start by pointing out what's wrong with the others, whoever the other is, right? And building really a fan base, if you will, around saying they're wrong, they're the problem, we are right, we are the ones with the answers. And Amos kind of taps into this strategy at the opening of his book at first by saying, let me judge all these other nations around you, Israel, that northern kingdom. And they're nodding along, yeah, you tell them, Amos, you get them. And so he starts talking about this country and judging their wrongs, and this country and judging their wrongs. And then he finally gets to Judah, the southern kingdom, right, which they had this kind of civil war and this break, and they're divided. And you can imagine the northern kingdom like, yeah, you tell those elitist southern kingdom people who broke away from us, what's up? You go, Amos. And then he flips the script. Then he kind of pulls the rug from under them and says, oh, by the way, Israel, you are the most guilty of these crimes, actually. You are the most guilty of allowing injustice to bloom and to thrive. And let me tell you about it. If you had like a drone shot of the countries that he lists in chapter 1, and I don't have time to read all that in chapter 1, do that on your own. But you would see it's like a circling, almost like a snake slithering and coiling until he grasps the northern kingdom of Israel in this way. And so, again, judging the nations, woo, yeah, go, right? But when it comes to them, it's a whole lot harder. And so let's do the same work. Let's look at these words that Amos has for the northern kingdom of Israel in the 7th century, 8th century BC, and think about how might the parallels apply to us today. I'm just going to look at a few of the passages that speak to the injustices that the people were allowing to happen in Amos' day. Beginning in Amos chapter 2, verse 6, they sell the innocent for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. They trample on the heads of the poor as on the dust of the ground and deny justice to the oppressed. Father and son use the same girl and so profane my holy name. They lie down beside every altar on garments taken in pledge. In the house of their God, they drink wine taken as fines. And then a few chapters later in Amos 5, picking up in verse 10, there are those who hate the one who upholds justice in court and detest the one who tells the truth. You levy a straw tax on the poor and impose a tax on their grain. And then one more sample passage from Amos, looking at chapter 8, picking up in verse 4. Hear this, you who trample the needy and do away with the poor of the land, saying, when will the new moon be over so that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath be ended that we may market wheat? Skimping on the measure, boosting the price, and cheating with dishonest scales, buying the poor with silver and the needy for a pair of sandals, even selling the sweepings of the wheat. So we see here there's a pretty general and sustained problem for the people of Israel in Amos' time that he's speaking to. There's really this insatiable hunger for some, for more luxury, for more for themselves at the expense of others. And this self-focus and self-orientation and self-indulgence is continuing to grow and grow and grow in their society. And so in contrast to that, Amos picks up this theme that the prophets carry through all their messaging, is that God's heart and care and concern is close to the poor, close to the marginalized, for the oppressed. God is against injustice and wants to see wrongs righted. And so he's going to judge any group of people as being in need of repentance that allows this to just go on, the suffering of others while others live in blissful detachment in the pursuit of the good life. God says, this is not good. You need to repent of this. And so the prophets are concerned, by the way, not just with individualistic responses, but with whole society responses. And so this is tricky for us to figure out because the setting of the prophets, again, in the 8th century, 7th century BC, is very different than the role of the church in our pluralistic democratic society today. There's a quote by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that I think can help us with a framework around this. He once said it this way: the church must be reminded that it is not the master or the servant of the state, but rather the conscience of the state. And so this framework is helpful for us to keep in mind as we read Amos, to not get confused about what was true in his day that doesn't apply to our situation today, but what is the heart of his message that applies to us today. So the overlay of governance and religion was expected for the people of Israel in Amos' day. Again, in the kingdom period of the Old Testament, right, the prophet and the king were one in the same kind of structure or team, if you will. The prophet's role was to bring the word of God to the people, to remind them primarily of their covenant responsibility. Basically, God said, hey, you need to live this way. This is the rules to be in right relationship with me and experience blessing. And if you're not, then you're going to not only receive a lack of blessing, there's actually cursing that will come to you. And so the prophet's role was to remind the people, primarily the leadership of the people, to live by that reality, live out of that covenant commitment. And so the kings and the priestly class, they were supposed to model this for the people and live in this way and ensure the people live this way. Now, newsflash, if you've never read the Old Testament, the people are terrible at this. The leadership is terrible at this. They rarely live out what they are called to do in a sustained, long period of time. There are shining moments of it, and there's radical change and good for people, but there's a lot of self-interest and breakdown of the morality that God wants in their society. And so we don't have that same structure, though. The church doesn't have that one and the same overlap with government. But the heart of Amos' message, for any and all of us who are claiming to be followers of Jesus, the principles there we ought to and are still called to live by, namely that we are called to leverage our possessions, our positions, even our voice, not for more of ourselves, but to work for the good of others and gaining security for them. And in particular, we ought to leverage some of our wealth, whether it's a smaller amount or compared, relative to others, or whether it's a larger amount, we leverage that to seek the good of others, to correct what is wrong and unjust, and try and make a difference for good. Remember, true faith on the inside ought to fuel justice on the outside. And we see a complete lack of care and disregard for justice in Amos' day. But it's important that we remember it's easy for us to be just as callous as the people were then for us today, or to be paralyzed when we don't know what to do about the problems that we see and the wrongs. We're like, what's the right choice? What's the right choice to make? I don't know what to do, so I guess I'm just going to do nothing and feel bad about it. But the Christian perspective gives us a starting point that we, first of all, cannot divorce our actions from the foundation of truth that God gives us in His Word. This gives us both the what and the why of how we ought to interact with others, with our neighbor in our world. How do we go about addressing the wrongs that we see? And so, for example, the foundation of universal human rights draws from the biblical truth at the beginning in Genesis, where it talks about people being created in the image of God. That's where we draw this principle that every person has dignity and worth as a human being. It's drawn from this kind of foundation. And so I just want to talk today about just one area where when we see wrong, when we see things that aren't right in our world, how should we respond as Christians, as believers, or just even as people that are trying to figure this out? What Christian perspective or what biblical perspective can help me make sense of how to act? And so I want to talk about the obvious issue, at least in our region, of homelessness, right? Of individuals who are not housed and don't have access to housing. What are we to do about it? And so there's a solution that's coming right in our backyard called the Good Neighbor Village. Now, the dynamics surrounding poverty are incredibly complex. One of my previous coworkers, who used to be a school principal in an area with a lot of lower socioeconomic issues, he described it this way. At a line, I think it's great. You should all know it. Lou Page said this: "Those that think they know the answers to poverty don't even know the right questions to ask." And so simplistic condemnations or simplistic affirmations that can fit on an Insta square and look nice and cute rarely, if ever, lead to significant, lasting change for good in the lives of others. Now, many people in our area here in Pierce County have made up their minds about the Good News Village. Either it's awesome, or you have incredibly deep reservations about what it is and the terrible things that it might bring to our area. But let's look at it a little bit more closely through the lens of these injustices that Amos levels against the people. And what if we just gave it an objective look and said, is this an Amos-styled response to the needs that we see in our world, to the injustices? Because none of us hopefully would say people living out on the streets, people's housing being in a tent in an underpass, especially some of those individuals that have served as veterans in the United States, none of us should say that's right or that's good, okay? Now, we might have different, again, solutions to like what we should do about it, but hopefully none of us say that's good, that's right. We all want to see change there. The question is, what possible potential solutions ought we seek after? And so we're looking at this and saying, hey, there's these problems that are existing that are deep and ongoing that cause people to experience living in a state of homelessness for a long, long time. And so it's good to see an individual and do something. I know many Christians that keep like a little baggie of toiletries or a little food bag or like kind of food coupons, and when they encounter somebody who's homeless, they hand that out to them. And that's wonderful because it takes a step that most of us don't. It takes a step saying, I'm not going to view that person as a problem, but as a person that is worthy of some measure of my compassion. But the challenge is the needs are so deep, even those individual actions of compassion are not enough to change this deep-seated, chronic, complex problem of poverty in our area. And so this is why we need larger scaled and faith-fueled answers to address the complexity of poverty and the experience of homelessness for some in our community. And so the Good Neighbor Village is an extension of the care that is being offered currently by the Tacoma Rescue Mission, a Christian-based organization with a decades-long track record, and they are learning and building upon a model of this community called Community First in Austin, Texas, which has created a holistic place for people who have experienced chronic, ongoing homelessness for years and years and years in their life to receive not only a place to live, but wraparound care in a true community that has expectations and guidelines as well as a way for them to contribute back to their community. But rather than me talk more about it, let's go ahead and watch a little bit of this.
The current system for addressing chronic homelessness in the United States of America is absolutely not working. This is a human issue that requires a human response.
Peanut butter and jelly or meat and cheese. Need a blanket, bro? Yeah. Let's grab us some food, man. Yeah.
Mobile Loaves and Fishes was started back in 1998 in order to feed the homeless in Austin, Texas. When the truck goes out, those that are serving and those that are being served are on the same side of the serving counter.
Oreos, cookie, water.
There's no disconnect. And this requires a human-to-human, heart-to-heart relationship.
Yeah, I know what it means. It's the simple things.
And that singularly was the game changer.
Truly, that food truck ministry is what taught us what we needed to know in order to build Community First Village.
In 2004, I came up with this idea that we could go out and buy a gently used recreational vehicle, lift somebody up off the streets. And I started fantasizing as the serial entrepreneur that I am, why can't we build an RV park?
Community First Village is a 51-acre master-planned community that is designed to lift the chronically homeless up off the streets of Austin. Mobile Loaves and Fishes cares for the people who have experienced long-term homelessness. Many of them 5, 10, 15, even 20 plus years. At that point, they have experienced so much trauma.
We believe that the single greatest cause of homelessness, particularly in our country, is a profound, catastrophic loss of family.
The Community First long-term housing solution for the chronically homeless, it started out of a Christian ministry, Mobile Loaves and Fishes, which was nothing more than a mobile food pantry, right? But from there, we see that faith-based response, that Christian response to a need. Somebody took a step, and then they took another step and another step. This is in line with what Amos wants us to see and do. Now, Pastors Joe and Rusty have been to the Community First Village in Austin, Texas. They've seen it firsthand, and they can attest that it's not an encampment of tiny homes. It's just some chaotic, anarchic, place of lawlessness. No, it's not that. that maybe you're imagining, maybe you've been told that this is what it's going to be like, but this is a community of people living by rules with HOA-like structures and guidelines that allow human beings who've been created in the image of God to live alongside one another in community. And they, again, are able to contribute back and receive this holistic care. Now, is this complex? Is this hard work? Absolutely. Is it solve every problem? No, it does not. But this is a faith-based, faith-motivated, rooted in the tradition of the prophets like Amos, answer to those who are experiencing chronic homelessness. Again, have been on the streets not just for a month, but a year or years or even decades. And this is not like a program to just kind of give you a place to live for a few months, get you back on your feet and out there. This is actually designed for those with such severe and significant needs that they have a place to live for the rest of their earthly life. There's actually going to be hospice care on site and end-of-life counseling on site for when it comes to when I'm facing the end. There's somebody who's going to be there to walk with me through that journey and that process. And so there's actually also 10% of the housing in the Good Neighbor Village is going to be for missional living, meaning people who are, quote unquote, just normal, everyday people can go through a process and elect to live among these individuals, incarnationally representing the care and the love of Jesus to them. Now, you are going to have to form your own informed opinion about the Good Neighbor Village. I cannot tell you everything about it. I can tell you what I do know. But the question is this: there are no perfect solutions to poverty. There's no one silver bullet to fix everything. But it's easy to criticize. It is harder to create a holistic, layered solution to a complex problem and issue that's aligned with the Bible and the core thing of the Bible, to treat every person with a dignity and worth that is aligned with their value as somebody who's created in the image of God. It's why God cares over and over again so deeply for the poor and the oppressed and the marginalized, and why God cares so much about injustice, because it's an affront to the image of God. And so while it's not perfect, is it a potential solution that's in line with what Amos calls us to seek and pursue? I believe so. I would encourage you to wrestle with that tension. Think about it for yourself. But remember this: Amos demands that the faith transformation that we experience in the inside ought to lead to justice being done on the outside. And the issue, that's just one issue, this issue of poverty and homelessness, okay? But there's a whole host of other issues of wrongs that Amos speaks to that could challenge us. If you spend time reading through the whole book, it challenges us around all these areas that we might kind of feel like, well, what's the right decision to make around these things? Do you pay taxes if you can get away with not paying them? If you're an employer, how do you know you are treating your employees fairly and well versus maybe taking advantage of them? How do you know that? There's principles in Amos that speak to that. Conversely, if you're an employee, how do you know you're honoring your workplace by bringing the best of yourself to there and not taking advantage of just slacking off and not doing the job that you were hired to do? It speaks even to our personal sexual ethics. And really that when we pursue sex outside of marriage as God's defined it, it leads to hurt, it leads to pain. It creates the circumstances in which abuse and terrible violations can happen when we stray away from what God intends sex to be. And so we don't have time to kind of dig into all those and think about that, answer those things. But the question that I have for you here is, regardless of the ways that morality is twisted or forgotten and leaves us with a brokenness in our world, how do you know how you're called to live? How will you make moral decisions based upon what is right, what is good? Amos and the prophets give us that clarity. They give us that challenge to consider, am I living differently because of my faith? The true faith on the inside that's changing me, Amos says, has to lead to justice being done on the outside. And so what does this mean for you and I today? Well, it means as we heed Amos' words, if we want to see change happen, it starts with our own hearts first and foremost, and being obedient to what it means to carry out that work being done. And so I want to read one more passage from Amos chapter 5, beginning in verse 21, that again will really challenge us. He says, speaking of God, for God here, I despise your religious festivals. Your assemblies are a stench to me. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Though you bring choice fellowship offerings, I will have no regard for them. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harps, but let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. So what's the application for us today? Well, just being at church, being at a service is not enough. Just showing up on Sunday isn't the point. It needs to transform us for the way that we interact with others on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and on throughout the week. And so where to start? I just want to focus even more intently on just one simple verse from there. Look with me again, 5:24. But let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. And so we're called to pursue that. But again, the problems seem massive and huge, and what can I do? And so my encouragement to you is start small. Start with the smallest possible step you can take. And so let me give you an example of this recently. So we had learned of a need in one of the school districts that our church has a campus that's placed in, Bethel School District, and we learned that there are 32 graduates this year that are unaccompanied minors. Okay? Meaning that in some way, shape, or form, their parents are not going to be there for them. And so we learned that the BSD was making kind of candy lays for them. So at their graduation, they have somebody, again, give them something, and also collecting gift cards. And we said, you know what? We want to be a church that makes sure that there is somebody, that these grads know there's a church in Pierce County that sees them and is cheering them on. And so, out of what people give to Rainier View, one of the things that it goes to is giving a gift card to each one of those grads. But I just got up in a couple of our services one Sunday, real brief thing, and just shared this and said, if anybody wants to come Wednesday, 10 a.m. To the Bethel Family Center and help build these, just write on your card, let me know. So a few people raised their hand. They said, yeah, I'd love to do that. And I had one of our members, who happens to be a police officer, say, I would love to show up actually with some of my coworkers and do this. We look for ways to be positively interacting with our community. And so we show up, and we've got the school district, doing this one thing, and then there's church people coming in, and we've got police officers coming in all together, and we're just having a great time building these candy lays and putting the candy in cellophane and ribbon and laughing at dudes' inability to do ribbon well, right? And so this is a small thing, and you might say, what does that actually do? What difference does that make in the face of the big, large problems? And on one hand, it doesn't do anything to address those massive needs in our society. But on the other hand, steps like this are always the beginning of long-lasting change. Why? Because it allows perception to be changed. It taps into the reality that we all see problems, but we can learn that, especially as we're motivated by our faith, we can do something. And trust is built. And one step can lead to another step, can lead to another step. And as we do that together, again, especially if we call ourselves followers of Jesus, that does matter, and change can come. Regardless of if it's a massive change or a small change, it does all matter. Because the reality is that for most of us, we don't have agency to change the large-scale systemic issues and problems. And are there times and places and ways to do that? Absolutely. But for most of us, we either don't or feel we don't have agency in the matter. But we all have agency to be able to do something small. And so it's my hope that if you know the love of God that's been revealed to you in Jesus, you sing about the greatness of his grace and the depth of his love, and you know that you would start this week with something small, the smallest of actions to meet a need, to address a wrong, Would you just ask God to show you that this week and to give you the courage to take a step towards that? If you're joining us here and you don't know that love of God, you're like, I would love to have a sense that there's a God who sees me that way, who loves me that way, and you don't know that God, I'm going to close in prayer for you to be able to know Jesus, that God shows us the extent of his love by sending Jesus to live a perfect life, show us what a sinless life looks like, but not only that, sacrificing himself in our place to pay the price for the wrongdoings that we do, that we engage with, to make those things right. He took that upon himself. And when we understand that good news of Jesus, it radically changes the way that I view myself and the way I view how I ought to treat others. So I'm going to pray for both groups right now, those of us who need to know the love of God in our lives, and for those of us that know that love that's been expressed and shown in Jesus, to take that step to do something small. Would you pray with me? God, first and foremost, I pray for anyone who's joining us, that you're saying right now, I need this love of God in my life. There's so much brokenness inside. There's so much hurt and pain, and I don't know what to do with it. God, would somehow you just cut through all of that and right now meet that person who's feeling that way right where they're at. Through your word, through an encounter with somebody else, just even through this prayer right here, that they could know the grace of God that's been revealed in the person and work of Jesus and could just call out to you wherever they're at with a prayer like this. God, I don't understand everything about the Bible. I don't get it all, but I know that I want that kind of love that was just described about who Jesus is. I want to take hold of that and that alone and trust in that to make me right with you. I want to turn from doing my own thing. I'm tired of that. It's made a mess of my life. I know it's brought pain into others' lives. I want to turn from that and begin to follow in the way of Jesus because I need that love and grace in my life. Secondly, I pray for those of us that do know that love, that we would go into our week looking not to solve a massive problem, but to just simply do something small because of the great, great love that has been shown to us in Jesus. And it is in his powerful name that I pray. Amen. Thank you so much for being here. Please reach out and message us if you want to talk about any of what we just went through. We would love to connect with you, get you connected with one of our leaders here at RVCC, and help you take whatever next step of faith you know God is asking you to take this week ahead. Have a great week.